This is the Italian Citizenship Podcast, hosted by Marco Permunian and Rafael Di Furia.
Hello there, and welcome back to another edition of the Italian Citizenship Podcast, presented by Italiancitizenshipassistance.com. Of course, we are back at it again with Italian attorney Marco Permunian. How you doing, man?
Good. How are you?
I am doing great, thank you. And today, we wanted to get into a little bit of not a tricky topic, but a topic that definitely deserves some time. And that is whether you actually need an attorney for going through the process of Italian citizenship. Depending on how you are going about the process, you may find that you may not necessarily need one, or that you definitely do want to have one there with you. But maybe even in the cases that you may not need one, having one there with you can help. But Marco, as an attorney yourself who regularly helps people through this process, what are some of the first things that you would look at, maybe from the perspective of your clients, to see if it's really worthwhile to work with an attorney?
I guess, as you said, we have to talk about the different processes that somebody can go through to gain Italian citizenship, to understand if an attorney, first of all, is absolutely necessary, or if it's just advisable to have one. So let's start with the application for citizenship by descent presented through an Italian consulate in the US. Some people are under the impression that an attorney can represent them before the consulate and that they don't ever have to go to the consulate. But in reality, because this is a personal right, an attorney cannot represent the applicant for citizenship by descent before the consulate, meaning that the applicant needs to go in person to the consulate to apply for citizenship. Of course, right now, with the current situation, some consulates have suspended the in-person appointments, and you instead have to mail in your application. But when there is an in-person appointment, the applicant has to go in person to the consulate. And nobody else can access the consulate but the applicant whose name is on the list of people who are applying for citizenship that day. With that being said, having an attorney by your side, an Italian attorney, of course, can be very helpful, especially considering the fact that the process is very complex. Not only understanding the eligibility requirements is complex, but also putting together all the documents and making sure that the documents are exactly the ones that the consulate requires. The process might look easy at times, but of course it is not. It's a very difficult process, and having an attorney by your side can definitely help in the process. Also, when you have to interact with the consulate, so not when you go to the appointment, like I said, you have to go to the appointment, but if there is a problem with your documents, if the consulate has questions about your documents, about your eligibility, especially if your case is not a standard case, but maybe a more complex one, it could be very helpful to have an attorney by your side, because the attorney can communicate with the consulate on your behalf. How do they do that? An Italian attorney can use a system which is called PEC system, which is a way of communicating with other public offices through certified email. So the attorney that represents you could communicate with the consulate on your behalf, of course, if they have a power of attorney, and discuss your case, see what concerns the consulate has, and the consulate could be more inclined to reply to an attorney, or maybe they would take it more seriously and address the situation immediately. Also, if there's a delay with your application, an attorney could contact the consulate and ask for an update. And like I said, a consulate could be more inclined to reply to an attorney rather than the applicant itself. So to recap, an attorney cannot go to the consulate on your behalf, so they cannot submit your application on your behalf. But an attorney could help you prepare the documents and the application in the best possible way, considering that it's a very difficult process. And also an attorney could be involved when it comes to communicating with the consulate if the consulate has concerns about your documents or eligibility, or if there is a delay, for example, with your application.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, especially because in previous episodes, we've spoken about the power of attorney, and also even how there are some steps within the process that can be a little complicated, which you mentioned here. But I think one thing that may just be worth mentioning is that it's not only that they have a better chance of having kind of the seriousness and the gravity that a lawyer brings along, but one thing that I think is also worth mentioning is that it's very clear from these episodes of the Italian Citizenship Podcast that over at Italiancitizenshipassistance.com that you guys are not just familiar with the process and all the intricacies that come along with it, but also the specific intricacies that come along with the specific consulates that people may be applying through, or that you have the ability to also get in contact with a comune in Italy to find out what their specific requirements could be. So just I think that could be worthwhile highlighting, at least when we're talking about Italian citizenship by descent. But when making some of these requests for documents, also, you need not just documents from the US, but also from Italy. But maybe would you mind talking a little bit about the procurement process? Because I know that's something that ICA has a lot of experience and a serious amount of expertise.
First of all, I would like to clarify, I think it's important for people to know that an Italian attorney can operate in the whole country. Unlike the US, where an attorney can normally only operate in one state or maybe some specific states, in Italy, there is no limit in terms of the territory in which the attorney can operate. So not only the attorney can address any Italian consulate on behalf of the applicant, because let's keep in mind that the Italian consulate is Italian territory, even if the consulate is located in the US. But also an attorney can get in contact with and represent the client when it comes to requesting documents from Italy, from an Italian municipality. And we've said this in many other videos. To apply for citizenship by descent, you will need your ancestor's birth certificate from Italy, as well as his or her marriage certificate if they got married in Italy. And you might also need not only one ancestor's birth certificate, but both of the ancestors, the male and the female, if they were both born in Italy. And I know we recorded a couple of episodes where we talked about the process of procuring the documents from Italy. And we said that it's not easy, especially if somebody is requesting those documents from abroad, primarily because there are a lot of people now that are seeking Italian citizenship. So the municipalities in Italy that have to release these documents are overworked and overwhelmed with these requests. So, and also when they see that a request is coming from abroad, from somebody who lives abroad, it's Italy, it's more likely than it will be overlooked or maybe put, aside. And let's say that it's also expensive for them to mail documents abroad. But when they see, somebody from America requesting documents, they may just say, okay, this guy is far away, so we'll take our time.
All right. Well, that even happened actually with my whole citizenship process, that because I was in another country, it just kind of ended up getting into a stack of papers, and the stack got bigger and bigger and bigger. And it took a lot of interaction from between the consulate and the comune where my ancestor was from to be able to get through to that. And so, I mean, that for me was impossible to do because at the time I really didn't have so much Italian under my belt. But I know that's something that also, when it comes to those sorts of situations, when there is processing that gets a bit difficult, you guys are able to actually get in contact with them, figure out what the issues are, kind of like what you were saying about the consulate, but directly with the comune, if there's something in the line that needs to kind of be taken care of or helped through along the process.
Yeah, as you said, and also I want to clarify this point. While it's not necessary to have an attorney to request the Italian records, it's probably going to be very helpful because the comune is going to be more inclined to interact or mail documents to somebody that is in Italy, and especially an attorney. They may just be more responsive when an attorney is involved.
Yeah, there's. I know you've mentioned also about certain rules about having to have certain time limits for responses, or they know that if they don't do X, Y, and Z within X, Y, and Z amount of time, that even the person at the desk potentially can get in trouble. So they want to make sure that everything is handled in the correct way, unless I'm mistaken about that.
No, that's absolutely correct. And you mentioned the Italian comuni, municipalities, and the way in which an attorney normally communicates with the comune is through the PEC system, which basically replaced a few years ago almost entirely the exchange of mail with the public offices. It's much easier to use a certified email, which basically has legal value. So the attorney will communicate with the municipality likely in the same way in which they would communicate with the consulate. But I think it's worthwhile to clarify that anyone could get a PEC, a certified email address. You can get one online, and you have to pay and subscribe, and there's a monthly payment, but anybody could get a PEC. So even if you reside abroad, you could get a PEC and communicate directly with the municipality. The thing is, if you communicate with them in English, it's going to be less likely to receive a response, or they might just reply to you in Italian.
I can say I've actually had situations, not for me personally, but situations that I know for people I know personally that did send messages in English, even with PEC, and they never received a response because the comune didn't understand the person, at least there, and thought it was just a fake email. Because why would an Italian comune receive communication in another language? Why would they need to have that? Because they're not required to speak English in Italy, only at the consulates in the US, Canada, Australia, and other English-speaking nations.
Yes, and since we're talking about Italian municipalities, the role of an attorney is even more important when somebody decides to apply for citizenship by descent directly in Italy. Because an attorney can be present with you at all the meetings and in every steps of the process. So while, like I said before, an attorney in America cannot go with you when you apply for citizenship at the consulate. So if there is an in-person meeting with the consulate, you have to go. There's nobody else who can go on your behalf, not even an attorney. But when you apply in Italy for citizenship by descent through an Italian municipality, and we've talked about the process many times. We've done a few videos about the process of applying for citizenship in Italy. So when you apply in Italy through the municipality, the attorney, the Italian attorney, can be present with you when you apply for residency, when you apply for citizenship, when you apply for the residency permit, when your fingerprints are taken by the questura, the local immigration office. But to clarify, they cannot go on your behalf. You will have to be present anyway, because there are some people that ask us, can somebody apply for citizenship in Italy on my behalf? And of course the answer is no. You have to go to Italy, you have to establish residency, you have to be present for the process, but an attorney can be present with you and facilitate the communication with the commune officials, which otherwise would probably be very difficult, especially if you're using a municipality with clerks that are not experienced, that they don't know much about the process, which unfortunately can happen, and it happens frequently. So an attorney can help you even more when you apply for citizenship directly in Italy, even if an attorney is not necessary by law. So you could potentially go through the process entirely by yourself. And if you don't speak the language, if the commune officials don't speak English, you could potentially hire a translator.
So I guess maybe just to kind of not wrap up the video, but wrap this section up, because we want to talk about 1948 cases in just a second. But it sounds a lot like the kind of answer, the short answer is that while it's not necessary to have an attorney for Italian citizenship by descent, that it can make a huge difference. Would that be a fair assessment of what you're kind of saying, a summary of what you're saying?
Absolutely. And unfortunately, I've seen situations where clerks in Italy were trying to almost take advantage of the applicant who was applying for citizenship by descent by themselves, by coming up with unreasonable requests or by pointing out discrepancies in the documents which were not really affecting the application, or maybe clerks that have their own understanding of how the process should work, and which is the wrong one. And if they have an applicant in front of them that applies by themselves, I've seen situations where they're more inclined to take advantage of them, or basically force the applicant to go through a process which is not the correct process. So let's say that when there is an attorney by your side that shows up at the comune, it's going to be probably a easier and more different process, because the clerk will take it more seriously, especially if you consider that, for clerks, these kind of applications for citizenship by descent, especially right now where there are a lot of people that are trying to get citizenship by descent, are seen as almost as a nuisance, something that they don't have the time to do or to deal with. So sometimes, not always, not all the times, but sometimes they just try maybe to scare people or send them somewhere else to apply somewhere else, just because they don't have the time or the will to work on these citizenship applications when somebody goes by themselves without being together with an attorney.
That's an interesting point. Many comuni in Italy, just to begin with, the workers there are overworked because they have so many responsibilities for so many different tasks, and the citizenship by descent requests and requests for documents and so on go to the same offices that take care of a million other different processes. But I think it may be worthwhile to talk also about the 1948 case, like I mentioned before, cases in plural. What do things look like for individuals? Is an attorney necessary? Can they represent themselves? Is it better if they have an attorney? How do things look? And especially because now there's this whole new situation where people are going to be applying in their ancestral province, or in the provincial court area. So I can assume, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that maybe with some of these new attorneys, not attorneys, but rather judges that are going to be jumping on these cases, that there could be a little bit more confusion where having a lawyer will be a good idea to be able to help clarify and guide the process. Or is that incorrect?
When applying for citizenship through the court system, so if you have a 1948 case, meaning you have a female ancestor in your Italian line and you only qualify for citizenship via a 1948 case, then an attorney is necessary. So you have to hire an attorney, then represents you before the court. Of course, first you have to gather all the necessary documents as if you were applying for citizenship by descent through the consulate. And for that phase of the process, an attorney is not necessary, even if it's advisable probably to have one by your side. But then when you have all the documents, at that point, hiring an attorney becomes necessary, which means that you have to sign a power of attorney, which you can sign even from abroad, before the U.S. notary, as long as you get it apostilled and translated. And that gives the attorney the power to represent you before the court. And the attorney at that point can file a petition on your behalf, and then they can be present at the hearing, submit all the briefs and documents that are required by the law, and they can also collect on your behalf the final judgment, which needs to be registered after the court has granted Italian citizenship. And as you just said, until recently, all the processes of this kind needed to be filed before the court of Rome. Now they have to be filed in the court where the municipality of birth of your ancestor is located. And I think it's worthwhile clarifying at this point that an attorney in Italy, any attorney, can represent an applicant, a petitioner, before any Italian court. So it doesn't matter if the attorney is from the north and the court where you have to file your petition for citizenship is in Sicily, in the south. So an attorney can represent somebody anywhere in the country. In Italy, they can go to the court physically to attend the hearing. Some attorneys will sometimes appoint other local attorneys to go to the hearing if you allow that in the power of attorney, because they don't have maybe the ability to travel that far, which is something that we don't do at ICA. So we attend all the hearings no matter where they are.
Really interesting. And so just a follow-up question before we round out this episode, during this process, if a person even wanted to be in communication with the court, or not necessarily in communication, but to get the information about their process, is that something that they would even be able to do on their own? Or is the lawyer really the representative, the only person that can actually have that access to that information along the way?
I've seen in other countries that the court sometimes communicates directly with the person, even if there's an attorney that represents that person. But in Italy, the court will only communicate directly with the lawyer, so with the attorney of record, and they do so by sending pack messages to the attorney. For example, when a brief is received from the attorney to set the date of the hearing, to confirm which judge was assigned to the case, and finally to inform the attorney of the outcome of the case. So they sent a communication to the attorney when the final judgment is issued.
So that's really interesting to hear how the communication works. But also, I believe we talked about it in a previous episode of the Italian Citizenship Podcast, or I'm sure you mentioned it at some point. I don't know if it was an episode specifically about 1948 cases, or if it just was an episode where we lightly touched on it. But also, your previous one cases, since you at ICA have the previous cases that you can show that it's already been demonstrated, other situations like future clients that you'll be representing have been successful. That's something that also will help the case of your client, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've said this in other videos. In Italy, the legal precedent is not binding for any judge. So a judge is free to decide wherever they believe is the case in a specific situation, regardless of the previous successful identical cases. But of course, it almost never happens. So if there is a track record, if an attorney has won several cases that are identical to the one that you are presenting, and if you show the judge that you have had favorable rulings in the past, a series of favorable rulings, then the judge will probably just do the same and approve the case.
Interesting. Well, I think this is going to be a great place to round out the episode, and thank you so much for shedding light onto this topic about whether you actually need a lawyer or not when applying for Italian citizenship or petitioning for Italian citizenship. But of course, if anybody is needing help with this, how can they get in contact with you and your team?
People can contact us through our website, ItalianCitizenshipassistance.com, or give us a phone call. The number is on the website.
Absolutely fantastic. And of course, if you're listening in or watching and you're interested in more content like this, be sure that you are subscribed to the YouTube channel and also subscribe to the audio only podcast. But of course, the bonus of being subscribed to the YouTube channel is that you are also automatically subscribed to the Italian Real Estate Podcast, where Marco and I also talk about Italian real estate, moving to Italy. We've done our series also on the different parts of the country, the different types of areas that we each would like and would consider when buying property in Italy. That was definitely a fun series that we're looking to continue as well. And also, if you're interested in any topics about life abroad, living abroad as an Italian dual citizen expat, be sure that you come over to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Rafael Di Furia, or you can find the audio-only podcast, Not Your Average Globetrotter. You can search that on Google or find me anywhere online through my name, Rafael Di Furia. Anyway, Marco, thank you so much again for making yourself available. This has been so great to hear about this topic, and also, especially as somebody who's gone through the process, and I did it DIY. I've mentioned this in previous episodes. I can always say the same thing, that I wish that you had been around when I was going through this, because it would have saved me so many headaches. Anyway, guys, stay safe and healthy out there, and we will see you all next time. Later.
Thank you.